Oftentimes, the number one mistake teachers make when they set up classroom routines has nothing to do with the routine itself. It's something that happens, or actually doesn't happen, before the routine even gets started being used in your classroom. And once you see it, you will start to see it everywhere. In this video, I'm going to walk you through what the missing piece is, why it matters more than most teachers even realize, and exactly how to add it to routines you already have in place so you can start this at any time in this school year. I'm also going to share a classroom story that showed me this so clearly and how a single question completely changed the dynamic in my classroom. So what is the mistake? It's this. Most teachers teach their classroom routines by explaining the steps. They walk through what to do, demonstrate the expectations, practice until it looks right, and that is the right starting point. But what we miss is that there is a layer underneath that is almost always skipped. And we miss the why. Students need to understand not just what the routine is, but why it matters. Not as a rule handed down from above, but as something that connects to who they are and how they live together in a classroom community. It's so important, and the reality is it's a part of developing a sense of self and personal and social awareness, so it's part of teaching social emotional learning or just character traits. When students have that understanding, the routine starts to run on something more internal, and your correction, when you need to give it, can become a whisper instead of a warning. It can just be gentle and full of grace. So here's why this happens so often. When we set up routines, especially at the start of the year, there is so much to teach that the thinking about behind the expectations tends to get kind of compressed or even lost. You say, we clean this up way because it's respectful, and everyone kind of moves on. And that makes sense. You're working with a classroom full of children, and you've got a full day ahead of you and so much to teach. But personal responsibility, the genuine understanding that your choices affect the people around you, is a developmental skill. Children aren't born knowing this. It is built in to them over time. It has to be named and illustrated and connected to real experience. Many students genuinely cannot hold the idea that when one person stalls, everyone waits, until that connection has been made for them clearly and specifically. And so that is a teaching gap, and it is one that you can close. So I want to tell you about a boy I had in my class. He was one of the most servant-hearted students I've ever taught. And when it was his turn to sweep at the end of the day when we did chores, he swept until that floor was genuinely clean. There was nothing left for our cleaners. When a classmate needed help, he was patient and kind and gentle. During lessons, he'd be curled up in his chair rather than sitting in his desk properly, but he was focused, on task, and completely present in every way that mattered. He was every teacher's dream, with one little exception. When he was doing something, he really liked to finish it at his own pace, which meant that when it was time to clean up for music, which was in another room, he would clean up slowly and methodically while the rest of the class stood in line waiting. And they really wanted to go to music. So, here's what is important to understand about this. His thoroughness came from exactly the same place as his kindness. It was not defiance. It was not inattention. It was not just his nature. So I know that the goal was not to change him. I did not want to change him. He was a lovely student, still is actually. And the goal was to help him understand that he was living in community and that his choices had a ripple effect. I thought about how to do that without making it a correction, without making it a moment that singled him out or made him feel like he had done something wrong or that something was wrong with him, because that would not have been productive, effective, right, fair, appropriate. It wouldn't be good in any way. So I read to the class the book, What If Everybody Did That by Ellen Javernick. And it's a picture book about what happens in a community when everyone makes small, thoughtless choices. It's warm, it's a little funny in places, and it gets there before the teacher does. In other words, we don't have to make all sorts of commentary about it. Throughout the story, the children were making connections, sharing thoughts and disapproval at all the right moments. I could see that they knew the truths that they were learning about being in community. They weren't able to fully live it yet, but they could see it. They needed to connect it to personal responsibility. At this stage, we're still at the pointing at what are those people doing instead of saying, oh, what about what I'm doing? But after that, whenever cleanup was running along, whenever this little student I mentioned was still carefully arranging things while his classmates waited patiently at the door, I'd walk over quietly and say, kiddo, what if everyone did that? And he'd look up and he'd see his peers, and he didn't need more than that. The whole framework was already inside of him. He just needed me to pull on that one little thread. He became far more responsive, not because I had corrected him, but because he understood. And understanding for a child like him was everything. And with that, what that moment showed me, and what I want you to hold on to, is this. In a classroom, compliance is a fragile thing. And over time, it can build resentment. But when a student has genuinely internalized the purpose behind a routine, your job becomes so much simpler. You remind, and often you barely have to do that. So the research that shaped my thinking for this series, A Teacher's Guide by Michaela Da Silva on the power of classroom routines, and she drew on executive function research, and that makes this point directly. For a routine to be effective, students need to be both physically and cognitively engaged with it. So, physically going through the steps is not enough. So as we have them model it, and we model it for them. When students understand why a routine matters, that cognitive piece clicks into place, and that is what allows the routine to become automatic, and what allows the student to eventually manage it themselves. So what does this look like in practice? Well, I have 5 things I would build into how you teach any routine. So first, have the students model it, of course, what it looks like when it's running well and what gets in the way. Students will watch and listen to their peers in a way they rarely watch me as a teacher, or I'm assuming you. The moment becomes more engaging precisely because it isn't coming from you. Ask one student to show the routine running well. You know, if it's sitting quietly, they're modeling sitting quietly. And ask another one to show what derails it. So, you know, you've got a student showing what it looks like to touch everybody, or, you know, be like this. And then you have the first student model again, the right way, to do it one more time. You want that to be the part that sticks in their brain. Okay, so that's number 1. Second, teach the purpose explicitly, not because it's respectful, but what actually happens when the routine works and what happens when it doesn't. These things make it real. And by the way, at the grades that I taught, didn't even understand what the word respect meant. It just kept getting thrown at them in their lives. So, for example, when cleanup runs smoothly, we have time for music. When it doesn't, we all miss what we were looking forward to. So that's the kind of explanation you might give. Step 3, he is the one that actually makes the whisper possible, but you can't get there without step 1. So it's build shared language. A book, a metaphor, a classroom story, a question, something that gives you and your students a shared reference point that doesn't require a full lecture every time you reach for it. That shorthand is what made the quiet whisper possible with my student. The whole understanding was already there. I just needed to pull one little thread, and it's so much more relational. So fourth, start with the whole class before going private. Before a quiet cue to one student, try a warm whole class acknowledgement first. Thank you for getting straight to your work, everyone, so we can keep doing the things we all enjoy. Appreciation before correction. Only then, as you've taught students, because those corrections, that appreciation teaches them when they're on the right track. So you do that first, and then only after that, the private reminders. And fifth, revisit when things break down. When a routine falls apart, and they do, return to the purpose, not just the steps. We talked about what this looks like for everyone. Let's check in on how we're doing. So here is the bigger picture. When students have thoroughly learned routines and have genuinely started to honor the expectations, behavior that does arise involves one student, not the whole room. Then, when we know that it's only that one behavior and everybody else stays on task, we know the classroom is managed. The other students know how to go about their business. You can give your full attention to the child who needs you without everything breaking down. That is the practical payoff of this work. And it doesn't come from tighter management. It comes from genuine understanding. So before you go, I want to leave you with one question. Is there a student in your class right now who follows routines inconsistently, but not from defiance, but from something else? It's not always the same as it was with my student, but something else. Thoroughness, maybe. Distractibility. Their own pace. What would it look like to teach them the why instead of repeating the what? I know for sure I'm a person who has been looking at the why behind my choices for my whole life. It's important to me. So this connects to 3 pillars of my Calm Classroom framework: organization and routines, classroom community, and SEL, and emotional literacy. When these 3 things work together, you're not just building an orderly classroom, you're building students who understand their role in the room, and that understanding carries well beyond the school year. And this is the whole thing about research-backed strategies that make them work well together, is because they work together. You can't do them in isolation. So this is not quick work. Building genuine community understanding takes time. And it looks different with every class and every child. I only had that one child maybe bring out that book. But here's what I do know. When a child learns that their choices ripple and the community they're part of is affected by how they show up, that is not a lesson about cleanup time. That is a lesson about what it means to be a person in the world. And that, in the end, is what a classroom is for. We're teaching children. We are not teaching curriculum. The curriculum is important, but the children are what we're teaching, or who we're teaching. So if you want to go deeper on building the systems that hold all of this together, I've linked my Calm Classroom Foundations guide in the description, in the pinned comment. It's kind of a practical overview of my full framework and how the pieces connect. And you'll see here some suggestions for videos that are connected to this idea, that if you found this valuable, you might find these valuable as well. Thanks so much for joining me today. Hope to see you soon. Bye for now.